Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines this hour. Trump considers a range of options against Iran, including possible military action as protests challenge the clerical leadership. Iran says it is ready for both war and dialogue, with rights groups reporting the death toll has risen above 500. Iran's parliament speaker calls the crackdown on protests a war against terrorists as he addresses a large pro-government rally in Tehran. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf says Iran is fighting a four-front war, including against the US and Israel, and warns of a retaliation if attacked. The EU Defence Commissioner says NATO would collapse if the US took Greenland by force, and EU states must defend Denmark against military aggression. Trump says the US must control Greenland to block Russian or Chinese influence in the strategic Arctic region. The International Court of Justice begins hearing a rare full genocide case, with Gambia accusing Myanmar of targeting Rohingya Muslims for destruction. Myanmar denies the charges, saying its actions were counter-terrorism as Rohingya victims seek justice. Venezuela says it has released 116 prisoners, adding to earlier December releases, with the Justice Ministry saying they were detained for disrupting the constitutional order. The move follows the US capture of Nicolas Maduro and comes as political pressures and demands for reconciliation mount. Sudan's army says it is preparing a major operation to retake Kordofan and Darfur from the Rapid Support Forces as civil war enters its third year. The military says RSF capabilities are being assessed and multiple formations are ready for a large-scale attack. Israel moves to advance two major settlement projects in occupied East Jerusalem, including 9,000 homes on the Kwandalia airport site. Palestinian officials warn the plans, including displacement in Sheikh Jarrah, threaten hopes for a contiguous Palestinian state. Fed Chair Jerome Powell says the Trump administration threatens legal action against him to gain influence over Federal Reserve interest rate policy. A top Republican senator warns the move undermines Justice Department credibility and vows to block future Fed appointments. Iran is now facing growing international isolation as the European Parliament moves to bar Iranian diplomats from entering its premises, citing Tehran's violent crackdown on protesters demanding political change. European Parliament President Roberta Metsola announced the decision on Monday, saying the ban will apply across Brussels, Strasbourg and Luxembourg. Metsola says the move goes beyond symbolic support, adding that those risking their lives on the streets of Iran need more than words of solidarity. The ban covers Iranian diplomats, government officials and representatives of the Islamic Republic, marking one of the strongest institutional steps taken by Europe in response to the unrest. Meanwhile, rhetoric from Tehran is escalating. Iran's parliament speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, warned US President Donald Trump that any new attack on Iran would be met with what he called an unforgettable lesson. Speaking at a massive pro-government rally in Tehran, Ghalibaf stated the following.
رئیس جمهور متوهم و متکبر آمریکا میگویم که ما ملت ایران همان حرف حاج قاسم عزیزمان را به تو میزنیم. ای ترامپ قمارباز، ما حریف توییم، تو سرحسینیم، ما منتظریم، ما مرد میدان برای تو هستیم. بیا تا ببینی همه امکانات شما در منطقه نابود می شود. بیا تا ببینی چه بلایی بر سر پایگاه‌های آمریکایی و کشتی‌های آمریکایی و نیروهای آمریکایی در خواهد آمد. بیا. ترامپ متوهم دروغ‌هایی که به تو میگویند باور نکن. به تو گفته بودند مشهد سقوط کرده، ولی مریدان امام رضا علیه السلام ایستادند تا پاسخ توهمات تو را بدهند. ما از خود
This comes as the US rights-based group Harana says nearly 500 protesters have been killed since the protests began in late December. Of course, we are getting varied reports from Iran as it undergoes an internet blackout. But joining us to discuss the ongoing situation there is Mark Sutherland. He's a geopolitical commentator. He joins us live from London. This story is developing by the hour, Mark, and of course the situation remains unclear due to the blackout that the Iranian regime has put on the internet, and so information is limited. However, what we do know is that Donald Trump is threatening a military intervention in Iran. Now, we're unsure what he means by this. A lot of things have been floated, but there must be a red line somewhere. Donald Trump said that if protesters were killed, then he would strike Iran. Now, these rights groups have said over 500 have been killed. Where would that red line be, Mark?
Thomas, good to be with you. I think the red line has already been crossed because of what he said, and we're seeing, as you've said, 543. There may be more, and the regime is firing on very, very brave Iranian citizens that have gone on the street because they have had enough of this regime. How that will play out, Thomas, one of the things that Trump has said, he profoundly said that in his first administration, is that one of the things that always used to annoy him was militarily, when the military would reveal their hand before they actually did anything. That was a criticism of the previous Obama administration. So we're waiting with bated breath. What we do know, I believe, when we're listening to people, is that they do want help. Now, how, as I've just said, how that will then manifest, we don't know. But the regime have the weapons, and they are firing on their own people. I saw footage that was shared today where people in body bags, which is just horrendous. And as you quite rightly said, there is a blackout. There is Starlink. Starlink has been up, and people have been sharing to the best of their ability on the streets. So far, and it's honestly my prayer, this is not stopping. We would be fully aware that the regime, the mullahs, the other people that call themselves politicians within the regime, would turn around and come out with the rhetoric that they do in regard to the ideology that they believe in. And there's a very good article by Marzi Amirzadeh today in 365 News, in Israel 365 News, talks about, as she has experienced in being locked up in 2009 within the Iranian regime, now not in Iran, but she experiences and talks about what the people are going through and what they want. And when they're shouting for the return of the Shah's son, that is what they want. They want this regime with every single tentacle of it cleared out of Iran. There's no room for reform, nothing. But that is what she believes and others believe is, and quite, we're hearing it, is what the people want. Thomas.
And indeed, we're seeing some action by further foreign governments. We've just heard that the European Union is going to be putting sanctions on and removing diplomats from the bloc. Is the international community doing enough? Is Europe's ban on Iranian diplomats real pressure here, or is it just mostly symbolic with the Iranian people?
I think you ask a very important question. Even when you're emphasizing the bloc, I couldn't agree with you more. The fact is, there hasn't been enough pushback. You know, when you are seeing citizens of a country who are asking for freedom, that want to throw off one of the most oppressive regimes that we have seen since 1979, going through that of the trilateral group's interference in 1979, and with President Carter's presidency is another interesting history to go through. But this, they need our support, and it seems that there's reluctance from certain individuals to then really emphasize and really speak up about that support that's needed on the ground over here. Within the UK, there has been huge protests outside the Iranian embassy over here, and as I said the other day, even a swapping of the flag that the Iranian embassy was not very happy about. Hence, calling the British ambassador in Iran into so they can have a word in his ear. But there's been thousands of people outside protesting there, and what has also been interesting is that members of the Jewish community, Israeli flags there, are supporting them as well in those protests. Thomas, just finally, we have to think of the funding that Iran does in regard to Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and other terrorism around the world. This is why, we want to. I personally have said it, and others. We want to see this regime go, and for people to be free. But you ask a very important question. People will be asking themselves. They need to be asking themselves how they can then help in this situation, maybe beyond words. The other thing is, I'm certain within the American administration, because of lessons that they feel were taught in regard to Iraq, Afghanistan, etc., the last thing they want to do is put boots on the ground. We also remember in the 12-day war last year between Israel and Iran, who then entered their country, and when they're launching drones from inside Iran. So there's a lot to play for at this point. And frankly, if people believe in prayer, there's one thing that we should be doing, that this regime is overturned and quickly. Thomas.
Yeah, and Mark, of course, this regime came to power with a revolution in 1979, and now the regime fears that it might fall in the same way. Is this the biggest threat to Iran's Islamic Republic since its inception?
I would say to you, in my humble opinion, with what I'm assessing, I would say yes. The way this came about, and that may be why people on the left are finding it extremely hard to even comment on this, as many of them have supported from the river to the sea cult that's gone on around the world, in my humble opinion. The other thing is when they look at we look at 1979, and it was the red-green axis again, and but people like President Nixon at the time, even though he wasn't president, making comments that if he was in, he would have supported the Shah. E.g., we go back to that. We go back to that history, and remember Iran before, how free it was, and a very, very liberal country, very modern country within the Middle East. Of course, it wasn't without problems at times, but there was no women being oppressed in the way they are. We're having to wear the hijab. You didn't have a morality police on the street, etc. So it's a very, very, very different world to what we have now. Thomas.
Mark, thank you very much. Do stay with us as we move on to our next story. And NATO member countries are discussing the next steps to collectively safeguard the Arctic. Alliance Chief Mark Rutte said on Monday in Zagreb, Croatia. Rutte emphasised that the alliance has been working together to ensure the region remains secure and is now focused on implementing concrete measures to protect what is at stake. Addressing the ongoing war in Ukraine, Rutte condemned Russia's recent missile strike on Lviv and attacks on civilian infrastructure. He stressed that NATO will not be deterred by Russia's efforts to discourage support for Ukraine, underlining the alliance's continued commitment to backing Kyiv, particularly during the harsh winter months. Let's listen in to what the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte and the Croatian Prime Minister Andrej Plenković had to say.
Let me first of all stress that all allies agree on the importance of the Arctic and Arctic security, because we know that with sea lanes opening up, there is a risk that the Russians and the Chinese will be more active.
Očito je i ovo što glavni tajnik kaže da postoje zabrinutosti sigurnosnog karaktera na području Arktika pod koje onda spada i Grenland, međutim siguran sam da se uz razgovore može pronaći rješenje koje će Sjedinjenim Američkim Državama osigurati sigurnost, a Danskoj upravo ono što svi poštujemo činjenicu da je Grenland dio Danske, premda nije u Europskoj uniji, ali je jasno da spada u njenu nadležnost i zato jedan kvalitetan dijalog ovakvu situaciju može po našem mišljenju riješiti na dobrobit svih i za opću sigurnost i to.
Meanwhile, the Greenlandic government has now also addressed the effort to shore up its defences amid repeated threats of military takeover by the United States. The Greenland government has firmly rejected any suggestion that the United States could take control of the island. In a statement, officials said such a move would be unacceptable under any circumstance. Greenland also announced that it will increase efforts to ensure that its defence responsibilities are carried out within the framework of NATO, emphasising the island's commitment to collective security. Mark Sutherland joins us now. Mark, is the Arctic becoming NATO's next major security front?
I think it's an extremely important security front. I mean, as people may be aware, of course, it's been under a protectorate. It's a protectorate of Denmark and has been for a number of years. And if you go through American recent history, they've got bases there. The Thule base named at that time, and in many ways, what in my own opinion, what will happen is that President Trump will say things, the administration will say things, it starts to rattle a few other people's cages, and then NATO has to respond, and in a positive way. And as you were right in the previous address, it was talking about in regard to the seasons changing, Russian, Chinese activity. So yes, they need to be very aware of what is passing in that geographical area, Thomas.
Yes, Mark Sutherland, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. We now move on into some breaking news, and Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum says she has discussed national security and sovereignty with US President Donald Trump following his remarks about possible ground attacks against drug cartels. Posting on social media, Sheinbaum said the leaders spoke about security cooperation while respecting each country's sovereignty as well as efforts to reduce drug trafficking. The talks also covered trade and investment ties between the two neighbours. Trump had said last week that land-based military action against drug cartels could follow recent US maritime operations in the Pacific and the Caribbean, though he did not specify when or where such operations might take place. We move on now when US President Donald Trump posted an image on his Truth Social portraying himself as the acting president of Venezuela. The graphic, styled like a Wikipedia entry, listed him as both the 45th and 47th of President of the United States and the interim Venezuelan leader. The unusual social media post follows a US military operation on the 3rd of January in which American forces conducted large-scale strikes on Venezuela, and the Trump administration said that they captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and First Lady Cilia Flores amid drug-related indictments. While the US government claims oversight of Venezuela's administration until a safe and proper judicious transition, no international authority has formally recognized Trump as Venezuela's acting president. Within Venezuela, Vice President and Oil Minister Delcy Rodriguez was sworn in as interim president under the country's legal framework, a position acknowledged by Caracas institutions. Joining us now to discuss this is Raymond Vickery. He's an international affairs expert and former US Assistant Secretary of Commerce. He joins us live from Washington, D.C. Raymond, thank you very much for talking to us. It's a pleasure, as always. Of course, this is classic Trump theatrics on his social media platform, posting an image of him self-proclaiming as the interim president of Venezuela. Of course, no international recognition when it comes to that title, and the political future of Venezuela remains unclear. Delcy Rodriguez has been sworn in as the interim president. What did you make of this, if not the message and the message behind it?
Well, thanks for having me, Thomas. It seems to me that this is just one more indication of President Trump's mindset, which is a throwback to the 19th century, in which you had great powers who put together their own empires. Instead of seeing the world as it has been since World War II, where we've had cooperation, a UN charter, principles of non-aggression, his view is that of my way or the highway. The old might is right approach, which led us to having empires in the late 19th century and early 20th, and led to disaster. Because when these empires rub up against each other, then you get generalized war, and you throw in nuclear weapons, and you have an existential sort of crisis. The other thing which it shows, it seems to me, is that Donald Trump, as you've indicated, is basically a showman. For 14 years, he had a television show, The Apprentice, in which the tagline was, "You're fired," to make for great interest dramatically. And so he continues to do this sort of thing, this sort of posting of a fake Wikipedia page, which is exactly contrary to what the international community, including the United States, has been committed to, namely to try to wage peace like you wage war. That is, to have a strategy, to have principles, to have partners to try to bring about generalized peace and prosperity rather than war. But that's not the orientation of President Trump or his administration.
And of course, Raymond, back then Donald Trump was the host of a show and a real estate tycoon. Now he's the president of the United States, and some would say the most powerful person in the world. How do you analyze his messaging? Of course, mainly through his Truth Social network, which of course is his own, where he's posted a few examples come to mind. The AI Trump Gaza meme, the video, the No Kings protests or video of him defecating on protesters. How do you view Donald Trump's use of social media, and have we ever seen anything like it before in history?
No, I think we have not. We have seen the rough and tumble of politics in the United States and things being said, but we've never had a president who has really disregarded the norms of what a president is, and that he should be charged with not self-aggrandizement, but the good of the country. Obviously, ambition has always been a part of the presidency, but there has never been a situation in which there has been this combination of ego, this combination of using the techniques of entertainment in order to be able to seek a position as a great man. I predict that our institutions will eventually hold, but we're in a very rough patch. We have these interim elections coming up here, midterm elections this year, and I think that this will redound, his actions will redound to his detriment, but he's trying to fix those elections as well, and we must work our way through this. But it is completely contrary to what has happened with Democrats, Republicans alike throughout the 250-year history of the United States.
Raymond, do stay with us. as we move next from the United States and over to Europe for our next story. And the European Union has made clear that conditions are not yet right to engage in direct talks with Russia's President Vladimir Putin over the ongoing war in Ukraine. This comes after the leaders of France and Italy suggested that Europe should re-engage with Moscow in pursuit of a negotiated settlement. However, the EU is taking a cautious approach, emphasising that any dialogue must happen under the right circumstances. Speaking from Brussels, EU spokeswoman Paula Pino said that while talks aren't possible at this stage, the hope is that they can happen in the future and help bring peace to Ukraine. Her comments underline that although diplomatic engagement remains a long-term goal, the immediate priority is to continue support for Ukraine amid the conflict. Let's take a listen in.
Unfortunately, we're not seeing any signs by President Putin to be engaging in such talks. So we're not there yet. But at some point, we would hope indeed that there will be some such talks that will finally lead to peace in Ukraine.
Raymond, it's Putin's long-term criticism of the Europeans that they want this war to keep going. What do you make of this decision by the European Union, this statement by the European Union? We, of course, don't know Moscow's outlook on this, that they won't engage with Vladimir Putin. Do you think that's stopping them from negotiations going further?
Well, I don't think that it really does stop from negotiations going further. It seems to me that the remarks from the EU are really a reflection of the need to build the prerequisites before you have a conversation between the leaders at the very top. This has been the way in which diplomacy has been conducted historically, and particularly since World War II and the formation of the United Nations, the EU, and NATO. This is really a reflection, it seems to me, of the opposition from the EU to the approach of Donald Trump, President Donald Trump, which has been a transactional approach like a real estate deal, where you get the two leaders, two owners, if you will, together. They have a conversation, and out of that comes a transaction in which you get a deal and you go forward. Unfortunately, that real estate model does not apply to international relations. Sure, you have to have summit leadership talks at some point, but you have to have a basis for those to produce long-term peace and prosperity. So I don't see the remarks from the EU as saying, no, diplomacy doesn't have a role, but it is that a rejection of this paradigm, this model, that you can just have transactional approaches and those are going to solve world problems. That is not the history of the world. And going forward, we have to get back to some semblance of using expertise. You know, foreign ministries and diplomats being involved have a role to play. It's not just a matter of Putin and Trump getting together and the deal is done, or the model of summit diplomacy has a role, but it has to have a foundation, and that foundation is not there because President Putin doesn't want it to be there. He wants to reestablish the old Russian Empire, which became the Soviet Union, and that is his measure of greatness. Unfortunately, a transactional approach with a person who has that view just does not work. So we have to get back to waging peace like we wage war, to have a strategy, to have principles, and to have partners. And it's going to be difficult to get back to that, but I think the world can, and we will work our way through this extremely dangerous time.
Raymond Vickery, thank you very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for taking the time. We finish this hour with news from the tech world. And Mark Zuckerberg's Meta platforms have named a prominent banking executive and former US Deputy National Security Advisor under President Donald Trump as its new president and vice chairman. Dina Powles-McCormick's appointment sees her transformation from a brief stint on Meta's board to a full-time executive role, reporting directly to CEO and founder Mark Zuckerberg. Powell-McCormick brings over 25 years of experience spanning global finance, national security and economic development. She most recently served as vice chair, president and head of global client services at the merchant bank BTD and MSD Partners. She has also held key government positions, serving as Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategy to President Trump. While making the announcement on a social media post, Mark noted that Dina will be involved in all of Meta's work with a particular focus, on partnering with governments and sovereigns to build, deploy, invest in and finance Meta's AI and infrastructure. This marks the second recent hire from the Trump administration at Meta, following the appointment of Curtis Joseph Mahoney as Chief Legal Officer earlier this month. President Donald Trump congratulated Powell-McCormick on Truth Social, writing, "Congratulations to Dina Powell-McCormick. She has said that she is a great choice by Mark." We move on now, and some news from the entertainment world. The Golden Globe Awards have wrapped up in Los Angeles, celebrating the best film and television over the past year. In the top film categories, Hamnet took home Best Drama, One Battle After Another won Best Musical or Comedy. On the television side, Netflix's Adolescence continued its strong awards run. Acting honours were spread across major performances, with Jessie Buckley winning Best Actress in a drama for Hamnet and Timothée Chalamet taking Best Actor in a musical or comedy for Marty Supreme. Rose Byrne won Best Actress in a musical or comedy, while Sentimental Value and One Battle After Another dominated the supporting acting categories. The night highlighted a diverse slate of global cinema, animation and standout performances across genres. Well, that's all that we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.